English, no? Wonder why it's not apply to them.
السلام علیکم. مولانا عاقب زیدی صاحب السلام علیکم.
وعلیکم السلام ورحمۃ اللہ.
وائس ٹھیک ہے ایک دم, آواز سمجھ میں آ رہی ہے؟
جی واضح ہے الحمدللہ.
اللہ کا شکر. چلیے میں آقای صمودی خسته نباشید.
سلام و احترام, ممنونم. انشالله که سلامت بشید.
منتظر دو تا عزیزانی از ایران قراره به ما ملحق بشن, آقای ذاکریان نامی و آقای احسان اجازی. زنگ زدم بهشون, الان نمیدونم گوشی بر نمیدارن. منتظریم که اینا هم جوین بشن بعد شروع کنیم. خب الحمدلله ظاهرا بله. سلام علیکم.
سلام علیکم و رحمت الله.
خسته نباشید دکتر. خیلی خوش اومدید. خیلی خوش اومدید.
خیلی متشکرم.
سلامت باشید. سلامت باشید.
به فارسیه یا به انگلیسیه؟
Of course it's in English.
It's in English. Okay. If you prefer in person, this is a good, yeah.
It was just informal conversation. I talked in Persian with you.
Oh, okay. حال شما خوبه؟ من مهدی زاکریان هستم.
بله گرفتم کاملا. بله آقای دکتر زاکریان. بله بنده مهدی باقر خان هستم و قرعه فال به نام من دیوانه زدن که این اجرا رو به عهده داشته باشم.
قرعه فال به نام من عاشق زدن.
منتظر بودم آقای دکتر احسان اجازی هم به ما ملحق بشن و ما شروع کنیم.
بله من در خدمت شما.
حتما.
فقط یه جایی اگر قطع بشه به خاطر شارژ باتری این رو در جریان باشید.
باشه انشالله که اتفاق نمیفته.
انشالله.
آقای حسن اجازی. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I, on the behalf of Iran Culture House, New Delhi, welcome to all of you, especially our panelists from Iran and India. And today's topic is Palestine and double standard of human rights. And the world knows what's going on in Palestine and in Gaza and Quds. And now, as an obligation and duty, we are going to address this issue with our panelists all the way from Iran and from India. Some of very, prominent name from academics from India, such as Professor S.M. Azuddin Hussain, who was, the head of the Department of History and Culture in Jamia Islamia, a central university in New Delhi. And after that, he was director, Raza Rampur Library. And we have Dr. Tasneem Rahmani, the President, Muslim Political Council of India, and Hujjatul Islam al-Muslimin, Maulana Akif Zaidi from Al-Mustafa University, Qom. And from Iran, of course, Professor Mehdi Zakarian Amiri from Open Islamic University, Iran, and Professor Ali Reza Samudi from Mufid University, Tehran, Iran, and Professor Ehsan Ejazi, one of the international relations expert from Iran. So we will have some very much valuable inputs on this topic. And let's start the discussion with Maulana Hujjatul Islam al-Muslimin, Lijana Maulana Akif Zaidi. I would request you to have some words, and your opinion and your, things which you have prepared about this topic, about Palestine and double standard of human rights. We are ready to hear you. And of course, our program is already live streaming from YouTube channel of Iran Culture House. So I would also welcome and thank to our all viewers who are watching us through our YouTube channel, and our entire viewers who are, following this program. So with the thanks, we are going to start this program, and we are going to hear the discussion from Maulana Akif Zaidi.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I express my greetings to all the other panelists and all the viewers who joined this program today. We are now towards the fag end of the holy month of Ramadan. This is the time when our spiritual investment, this is the time when the increase in taqwa and God awareness that our fasting through this month has accumulated for us provides us with the spiritual energy and the concentration and focus to speak about the important topics of the day with greater depth and with greater sincerity and seriousness, inshallah. This is a good opportunity that has been provided by the organizers of this program for an exchange of views on this holy day, the last Friday of the holy month of Ramadan, which alhamdulillah has also been entitled Yawm-e-Quds, Roz-e-Quds, the day of Quds, a very appropriate coincidence of holiness as well as political awareness, because what the world sorely needs is for the world's politics to become more and more entwined with genuine spirituality. And this in itself is a small step in that direction. I would like to spend a few minutes sharing my thoughts on this topic. And I will begin with a brief look at that which is very obvious for any intelligent observer of the world's stage. At this time, the issue of double standards in the application of human rights when it comes to Palestine and the Palestinians in relation to other parts of the world is more obvious than ever before. if we just look around us, and our headlines these days seem to be dominated by the events in Ukraine, we can see this double standard very clearly. For example, those who are resisting or fighting against the military action of Russia at this point in time, they are called freedom fighters, while those who are resisting Israeli and Zionist occupation are called terrorists. The world's major powers are leaving no stone unturned to assist what they call the Ukrainian resistance and liberation movement. They're sending in arms. They're providing support in the form of media support. They've managed to activate nearly every international organization in defense of Ukraine and for the condemnation of the Russian action. While on the other hand, we see that all the international organizations and all the major media organizations continue to support the oppressor and the aggressor in the case of the Palestinian oppression and the conflict between Zionism and the people of Palestine. The double standards are becoming so obvious now that chinks have started to appear in the armor of the Western mask that is worn on this issue. And though it's still early days, we see an unprecedented level of objection arising from certain quarters within the Western world itself. There are certain celebrities. I'm not concerned with their personal lives or whether they are and what their motives are, but it is notable that a number of celebrities in the Western celebrity culture and space have begun to express their discomfort with what is happening in Palestine. Some of them have even pointed out the double standards. What I mean is that the issue of double standards is so obvious that in a way it becomes superfluous and unnecessary to draw further attention to it in this day and age. In addition to the very obvious application of double standards when it comes to the human rights of the Palestinians vis-a-vis other peoples, we can also add that this issue of double standards, while it is the most severe and glaring in the case of Palestine, it is certainly not limited to the issue of Palestine or to the Palestinians. I would just like to give two quick examples and move to the main body of what I would like to say. Those of us who've been following the news have seen how a rich kingdom like the UK, a rich country and a kingdom like the UK, has just struck a deal with one of the most war-ravaged and poorest countries on earth, a country in Central Africa called Rwanda. The UK has just struck a deal with the Rwandan government to send a number of asylum seekers to Rwanda for what they call processing. So you have this unedifying spectacle of one of the richest countries in the world, which in itself is deeply implicated in the creation of refugee flows in the world, sending these same refugees which have been forced to migrate towards the global north and towards Europe, sending them back to the bowels of Africa for what they call processing. And from Germany, we have news that in their eagerness to welcome white Christian refugees from Ukraine, the German authorities have begun to evict Afghanistani refugees that had been housed in government shelters and government-provided accommodation. These Afghanistani refugees, which once again, their refugee flow has fundamentally been created by actions taken by countries such as Germany. First, they are made into refugees because of actions by these countries. Then the cream of them is given entry And the cream of these societies, such as Afghanistan and other countries, is skimmed off in the form of refugees. And then they are humiliated and degraded in this fashion by being kicked out of the accommodation and having their accommodation handed over to the Ukrainians. So what we see is that while the issue of double standards in Palestine is in certain ways unique, it is a problem that is shared with other problems, with other issues, and with peoples of other countries which points to a deeper malaise and deeper problem that humanity is facing in this regard. What I mean to say is that this issue of double standards when it comes to Palestinians, which is most severe, and double standards when it comes to other oppressed people, which is also severe, but perhaps not as severe and not as extensive as it is in the case of Palestinians. The spread of this problem and the fact that it is not limited to one particular issue or one particular set of oppressed people indicates that there is a deeper problem at play here. And that's what I would like to draw attention to. And to be able to do that, I would like to take the help of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in December of 1948. It's because of this declaration, the UDHR, that the term human rights has gained such currency in the world today. If we skim through this, which consists of one preamble and approximately or exactly 30 articles, we come across statements such as this. I'm just going to read a couple of statements from the UDHR. In the preamble, it says, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. This is how it begins in the preamble. It speaks of the inherent dignity of the equal and inalienable rights of all members in the human family. Similarly, Article 1 says this: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That's how this begins after the preamble. Very lofty words and lofty sentiments, no doubt. But there appears to be a crisis at play here. The UN, the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, while it speaks of the inherent dignity of man, it speaks of the inalienable equality of mankind, it does not provide us any clue or indication as to what the source and the philosophical basis of this inherent equality is. This inalienable dignity and equality of mankind, what is it based on? Why does man have inherent dignity or inalienable equality? Since it doesn't touch upon that, since it doesn't spell out what the philosophical bases for these claims are, we are left with no option but to delve into the intellectual history of the forces that had a decisive role in writing the UDHR. And as you know, the UDHR was drafted by liberal elements in the West, particularly a set of academics, most of whom were American in their nationality. They were individuals who were horrified by the slaughter and bloodshed that they had witnessed in the two world wars in the first half of the 20th century. And they drew upon their intellectual resources to draft the UDHR, which then acquired universal acceptance. When we delve into the philosophical bases and the ideological roots of those who have drafted the UDHR, we come to an important conclusion. And the conclusion is this: that this inherent dignity that they speak of, this inalienable equality of all members of mankind that's mentioned in the UTHR, is based on and rests upon no philosophical basis other than the will of those who have written it. What I mean to say it, that those who have written it and those who support this view of human rights, as has been reflected in the UDHR, they believe that man and mankind, the members of humanity, are inherently dignified and inalienably equal simply because that's how they want it to be. They feel that that's how it should be. They say that it must be so. Because we are humans, because we have come to this conclusion, it must be so. In other words, the intellectual, ideological, and philosophical roots of the UDHR are fundamentally found in human subjectivity, in the subjective view of humans having inalienable equality and inherent dignity. There is no fundamental ideological basis for this view outside of this document. And this perhaps is the reason why the area of human rights has become such a vulgar playground of power and of greed. It has become so easy to misuse this holy idea and this precious idea of human rights. It has become a plaything in the hands of the powers today. Those same forces who are the greatest violators of human rights are able to talk with a straight face about the need to defend human rights and present themselves as the foremost defenders of human rights. They are able to apply staggering double standards when it comes to different peoples and different oppressed peoples. For example, Palestine, of course, being the prime example. They're able to apply these staggering double standards and get away with it. Because the fundamental problem seems to be that the version of human rights that has been propagated and then subsequently so heavily misused by these forces is essentially based on a subjective outlook. What we need, what the world needs today, what the world that has tired of this cynical misuse of human rights, a world that is tired of this ever-expanding oppression, what the world needs today is a new conception of human rights, something which is based on objective criteria. Because once it is based on objectively identifiable criteria, it will not be possible to misuse it so easily as we see in the world today. What we are in need of is an objective criterion that allows us to define human dignity, human equality on that basis. And here, this is where the world's major religions and spirituality can play a fundamental role, a transformational role in the regime of human rights governing the world today. By way of an example, I would only like to quote one verse from Surah Isra in the Holy Quran, where it says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. In this holy verse, we have God stating that we have dignified the children of Adam. Humanity has been provided dignity by us. And we, that is God, God says, we have rendered them superior to many other things that we have created. This is an example of an ayat or a verse, and there may be other such verses in other holy books as well, which can form an objective basis for the establishment of a new system and regime of human rights, where the dignity of mankind is based not on the whims and fancies of man, but it is based on an objective reality. And that objective reality is that man is a creature created by God, and he has been endowed with this dignity. And once this dignity has been endowed in his essential creation by God, it becomes inalienable. It cannot be taken away from him, because it hasn't been given by man for man to have the power to take it away. And in such a case, violations of human rights become that much easier to understand, spot, and stand up against. And the cynical misuse of human rights that seems to have become the norm in today's world will no longer stand up to scrutiny. So what I'm essentially calling for is a shift towards a more spiritual outlook on human rights in particular, and on politics in general. Of course, there remain several questions that need to be discussed and answered in this. For example, there is, of course, the concern, and a valid concern, that we see that religion seems to have become a tool in the hands of oppressors. I'm in India, I'm from India and in India. And in India here, we are suffering from this problem in a major way. These are valid concerns, but I believe that with the right application of our minds and discussion, these issues can be sorted out. And the misuse of religion by certain cynical elements, such as what we see in India today, need not necessarily be conflated or confused with the genuine role that religion can play in building an objective regime of human rights, politics, and justice in the world today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Maulana Akif Zaidi, for your valuable inputs on this topic. And of course, Gandhiji also says no to the Jews invasion and settlement in the Palestinian territory, and he said that once upon a time that Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense that England belongs to the English or France to French, and it is wrong and inhuman to impose the Jews on the Arabs. So it shows that the original fabric of Indian politics and perception is, of course, pro-Palestinian and pro, whatever you can say, oppressed kind of people around the world. And we never supported this kind of elements who are destructive, and they are playing this destructive role throughout the world, such as Jews and Israelis through their invasions or their destructive policies around the world. And they are slowly capturing the world, and through the media, all the means to ensure their, silly interests. So we'll go forward with these words, and really we are thankful for Idare Nadai Haq who are supporting us to having this webinar. And once again, I'm welcoming to our viewers who are who have recently joined us, during last few minutes on our YouTube channel. And now I'm going to hear from Iran. I would request to Professor Ali Reza Samudi, who is the international relations expert and analyst from Iran. And of course, he will throw some lights on this topic. So we are hearing you.
In the name of God, hello everyone. Thanks for participating in this event. First of all, I'd like to thank Iran Culture House for giving me the honor to present here. And before beginning my presentation, I would like to congratulate all Muslims in advance, Eid al-Fitr, and more importantly, we have the occasion of Day of Quds, which is a day created thanks to Imam Khomeini's intelligent initiative to unite all Muslims on the issue of Palestine and in support of the oppressed Palestinian people. The topic I'm going to talk about is the European Union country member states' double standards on the issue of Palestine. We all know that the European Union is the member and a part of the Middle East Quartet, which was established in 2002 with the aim of coordinating the efforts to solve the or to find a solution to the so-called Middle East peace process. And we know that the European countries are responsible for the creation of the Zionist regime, especially Britain, which had colonialist ambitions in the Middle East, and London thought that the settlement of Jews in the Middle East would be in its interest. And we know that since 1980s, the European countries advocate the two-state solution. When the war in Ukraine broke out more than 2 months ago, many in Palestine and other parts of the world started questioning that the way the European countries reacted to this crisis, particularly the difference in international community's response to that crisis in comparison with the decades-long Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. Nowadays, the European countries are facing accusations of double standards for supporting sanctions and, of course, international war crime investigations against Moscow and Russia, while blocking these investigations when it comes to Israeli military actions in the Palestinian territories. Drawing on the responses from the European capitals, Palestinians are wondering why these actions is not applied to them. We see that while Western media have framed the actions of Ukrainians in defending their homelands as rightfully legitimate, Palestinians do not receive the same treatment to their cause, and they are questioning the accuracy and the rightfulness of the actions of the European countries. We have, of course, heard that Palestinian officials like the PA president and, of course, Prime Minister of Palestine that asks the international community stop these double standards. Of course, in Britain, the Labour MP, Julie Elliott, has talked about the double standards and says that when it comes to standing up for Palestine, we see that European countries in action. And of course, in another Irish lawmaker, Barrett has said that we should stop the double standards toward Palestinian people. Interestingly, we have heard that the UEFA somehow fined the Scottish Premier League team Celtic for its follow the flags of Palestinians, saying that these are political symbols. But on the other hand, we see that the Ukrainian flags are flown widely in different matches with the approval of the footballing authorities. One of the latest examples of these double standards could be seen after the release of a report by Amnesty International, in which the Israeli government was accused of international war crime, apartheid, and they said that the Zionist regime is practicing international crime of apartheid toward Palestinian people. But the reaction of the European countries was very interesting. For example, Germany only focused its opposition on the term of apartheid and willfully ignoring the substance in the report's findings. And the United Kingdom said that the ICC should drop an investigation of Israeli a war crime with this pretext or on the grounds that the Palestine is not a sovereign country, but we know that the United Nations has recognized Palestine as a state. And you might heard that in the last year, the European Union somehow delayed millions of euros in annual aid to PA after the EU's delegates said that or accused PA school textbooks for containing anti-Semitism. But we know that the bloc does not monitor Israeli textbooks and which are full of enticement against Palestinian people. I would focus on 6 areas which shows the United States and of course European countries' double standards. If I have time, I will go on.
You can take
Okay.
2 or 5 minutes.
Sorry, I don't have the.
You can carry on 2 or 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes. Okay. As I mentioned, there are 6 areas of double standards when we study the European policies, the European Union policies during the past years. The first is human rights. تصویر منو دارید؟
نه.
من نمیدونم حالا چه مشکلی پیش اومده. آره میتونم ادامه بدم؟ آره صدای من اگه داشته باشید میتونم ادامه.
گوش میکنیم. بله. Yeah,
Thank you.
Try to sum up that, try to summarize it.
Okay. The first one is human rights. We know that the EU has no subcommittee for human rights with Israel, although such bodies are a component of the EU's relations with partner countries. Years ago, the EU yielded to Israel's refusal and agreed instead to a only informal working group on human rights. And similarly, the EU-Israel Action Plan has the weakest human rights commitments of all EU action plans with neighboring countries. The second area is International Criminal Court. We all know that the European countries support ICC, but in the case of Palestine, most of the EU member states, including France and Britain, pressured Mahmoud Abbas not to seek for the membership of ICC. And at that time, they claimed that ICC involvement in this would somehow undermine the so-called Middle East peace process. And when ultimately Palestine managed to join ICC, for the first time, the European Union did not issue a welcoming statement. The next area is sanctions. We know that the European Union applies sanctions to many countries, and seemingly sanctions are the first and default response to international challenges by the EU. But unfortunately, we see that Israel is not on the list. This is despite large-scale violations of international law and human rights in the occupied territories. And we know that expansion of settlements in the West Bank is just one example. Yet the EU does not apply mildest sanctions on Israeli regime for the settlement expansions or against extremist settlers who violently attack Palestinians and destroy their property. And the few measures the EU has taken so far, like the differentiated labeling of settlements products, are not sanctions. The next area is security. The EU has emphasized its commitment to Israeli security, but rarely mentions to the Palestinian security. This happens despite the fact that the latter has suffered large casualties and high level of insecurity during the past years. The EU affirmed Israel's right to defend itself, but it does not say that whether the Palestinian people have the right to defend themselves or not. The next area is the quartet principles. As I mentioned, we know that the European Union is part of the Middle East Quartet, and it demands the Palestinian governments recognize Israel, accept the previous agreements, and renounce violation. And of course, the violence in the Palestinian territories. But in 2006 and 2007, the European Union financially boycotted Palestinian governments, including Hamas. And we know that the EU's performance somehow contributed to the disastrous political split between West Bank and Gaza. And we know that neither the Quartet nor the European Union have demanded that Israeli should adhere to these same principles. In fact, Israeli would not pass the test because it does not recognize Palestine. It does not abide by its commitment, even the Oslo Accords or roadmap, and it resorts to violence regularly. And the last area is nuclear weapons. We know that the European Union tolerates Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal and deviation, and it has done during the past years. In fact, we know that the European countries, especially France and the United Kingdom, helped Israel to get the bomb in 1950 and 1960s. And we know that Europeans always vote against the international resolutions asking this regime join non-proliferation treaty. But Israel has refused to do that. This really stands in stark contrast to the pressure the European Union exerts on Iran to curb its nuclear activities. At the end, I should say that this double standard is multi-layered. First of all, we have the evaluation or importance of one occupied people over another is telling. Unlike Palestinians, Ukrainians are a people worth defending because they have a common enemy and they share the enemy. Moreover, Palestinians are deemed a third world Arab non-white customary victim. The Ukrainian are white, sovereign, and European victim of a common enemy. People say that it took only a few days for Europeans to impose sanctions on Putin and Russian Federation, but imposing sanctions on Israeli has taken more than 17 years. It seems that often we say that Europe and the European countries are payer but not a good player when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian issue. But European financial support for Palestine cannot hide the Europe's de facto complicity in 30 years of a US-dominated, the so-called peace process. At the end, I should say that the EU needs to engage in a paradigm shift on this issue if it's not going to be left behind by events. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Ali Reza Samoudi. Very good points were raised by you and, of course, by Maulana Akif Zaidi that the European countries are expressing their concern, their solidarity with the Ukraine, and on the other hand, they are not only not supporting the Palestinians, but they are supporting Israel and the invaders, of course. So this kind of double standard, the world are, witnessing, and history will, of course, note it. And of course, the other generations will note about this, that these kinds of violations of human rights were throughout the history of humans. And another point which you have made, but it's excellent, that we have to salute Imam Khomeini for, generalizing this issue, and, he could successfully took this issue to the mass of the Muslims, and it was not confined to the only few political leaders of the world. And as they were trying to project it as an Arab issue, an Arab countries issue, Imam Khomeini could, introduce it as a, a human crisis, and as a Islamic brotherhood issue, and all Muslims around the world should have, should feel concerned about this issue, and should, feel responsible to part a role, to demonstrate their feelings, and to condemn the Israelis invaders. And we have to really, we have to be grateful to Imam Khomeini for doing this, that he could successfully send this message throughout the world about Palestine by declaring the last Friday of Ramadan Quds Day. Now we are going to hear a very prominent professor of history in India, Professor Azuddin Hussain Hamedani, who was director of Raza Rampur Library, who was the Dean Faculty of Humanities in Jamia Millia Islamia. And now we are going to hear you, sir. Professor Azuddin, we are hearing you.
I'm highly grateful to Iran Khelter House for giving me this opportunity to share my views on this topic. I think the first chapter of human rights was given by Prophet Muhammad in 622 AD at Medina, where he said the life of Christians, Jews, pagans, and Muslims are safe. And not only he issued a charter, but he did justice with all the followers of other religions. And we only talk of human rights, but Prophet Muhammad practiced it, and it continued even after his death. But when this caliphate was converted into Mulukiyat or kingship, that destroyed the fabric of Islam. And so many injustices were done by the Umayyad monarchs, Abbasid monarchs, and when they reached in other parts of the world, Central Asia, India, and other parts of the world. And we find that apart from Islam, they have taken some other principles to follow in their government. I have heard of Ziauddin Barni, an alim of 14th century in Delhi, and the murid of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya. He writes that today it is not possible to follow the Islamic government established by Prophet Muhammad or followed by 4 caliphs. But, and when I was a student, I thought he is right. But Imam Khomeini proved it in 1979 that no, even in 20th century Islamic Republic is possible. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, an alim, a thinker of India, he writes in one of his letters in 1913 to Maulana Sayyid Sulaiman Nadwi that the Arabs have started the movement of decentralization. And this decentralization harmed the Arabs. And we are not aware that how this movement affected the Arabs and the position, the calamity which is faced by Palestinians is the result of this movement of the Arabs for decentralization in the Arab world. And not only these monarchical states in the Arab world, even in Iran, monarchy was there. Who was caring during monarchical days for these poor Palestinians? So not only the double standards of Europeans, we also followed the double standards. It is the credit goes to Imam Khomeini, who talked about the Palestinians and their cause. But I'm happy and I'm proud of it, of being an Indian, that India from the very beginning had taken the cause of the Palestinians. The first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, did a commendable work in non-alignment movement and supported the cause of the Palestinians. And Indira Gandhi also supported the Palestinians. I was the member of the faculty of Jamia Millia Islamia, not only government of India, even Jamia Millia Islamia, whenever there was any injustice with the Palestinians, we were organizing the protest march, we were organizing the dharna. And you will wonder to know that on 3rd May 1982, the degree of honoris causa was given to Yasser Arafat by Jamia Millia Islamia. So India played a great role to boost the morale of the Palestinians in comparison to the other countries of the world. So we have to be very practical if we want to protect the interest of the Palestinians. And like India, we have to protect them, we have to do movements, and we have to pass such type of resolutions in those bodies where we can play an important role. Only by talking, we can't protect the cause of the Palestinians. Now, as far as Imam Khomeini's contribution for the Yom-e-Quds, it was not there earlier. Who was talking about Yom-e-Quds on Jumu'atul Wal? Nobody was talking. Even Iran was not talking. Leave everyone. Even Iran was also sleeping on the last Friday of and other parts of the world also. But the credit goes to Imam Khomeini, who has established the Islamic democracy in Iran and provided a platform where a movement could be launched for the protection of the Palestinians. So we have to adopt such type of attitude so that we can protect the problems by Palestinians, and not only by organizing these. Like I remember Mr. Anwar Jamal Khadwai, who was during whose vice chancellorship the degree of honoris causa was given to Yasser Arafat. So we have gone to meet him, and he said that only signing on paper, we were organizing a protest. So we went to his residence and asked him to sign this letter of protest. So he said that signing on paper, you can't fight a battle. You have to come on platform, or you have to come down on footpath. On footpath, you have to fight the battle. So this lesson was given by Mr. Anwar Jamal Khadwai in 1982 to me and Professor Muhammad Talib, who is now teaching in Oxford, that we have to be very practical, and only by following these steps, we will be able to do some work for the cause of the Palestinians. Otherwise, for talking, for quoting the quotations from Quran or Hadith, Palestinian cause will not be solved. We have to fight this battle on the footpath, and only then we can strengthen the cause of the Palestinians and we can support. I am grateful to Iran Culture House for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Of course, thousands of salutations to Imam Khomeini, and the credit goes to him that he could successfully introduce this topic to the human brotherhood throughout the world. And of course, with the due respect for your inputs, we need some practical initiatives, and we have to be more vibrant and active and more conscious and attentive towards the things which are going on in Palestine. And of course, rightly said by you that Imam Khomeini could do this, and our Indian leaders, of course, have done a tremendous job in this regard. But unfortunately, we have to admit that I think somehow that the originality is nowadays missing, somewhere, and our traditional stand towards Palestine is no longer like that, which was famous for India by our ancestors and by our previous leaders like Gandhi and Nehru and all that. So things are somehow alarming, but we are optimistic and we are hopeful that we'll definitely successfully come out of it, and God will help us. But as you said, that only talking is not sufficient. We have to be more active. We have to, show some more concern, some more responsible attitude towards this topic. And thank you very much. Now, I'm going to hear from Dr. Ehsan Ejazi from Iran. Professor Ehsan Ejazi is in a faculty in the University of Gilan in Iran. Now we are going to hear you, sir.
Thank you so much. Hello to everyone. It's my pleasure to take part in the great webinar. I deeply appreciate Iran Culture House efforts to hold the webinar. I want to talk about approach of international organizations towards Palestine, human rights condition in Palestine. The subject of human rights and dignity and prestige of every human beings has been the most important issue in international law in 21st century. In recent decades, the United Nations has devoted a large part of its activities and to human rights issues. In 2006, the Human Rights Council, as a subsidiary of the General Assembly, replaced the Human Rights Commission. The task of this council is to monitor the implementation of the provisions of the Charter of Human Rights in the member states of United Nations. The most important human rights violations committed by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territories. Those violations include expulsion and forced displacements, discrimination and citizenship deprivation, violation of minority rights, demolition of houses and land confiscation, the violence of settlers, violation of children's rights, and violations of Palestinian women's rights, violation of freedom of expression, and the siege of, and most importantly, the siege of the Gaza Strip. The Human Rights Council asserts the Palestinian territories, including the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, has been occupied for over 40 past years. The council has
We can't hear you, sorry.
Can you hear me?
No, it's come. Okay, now it's okay. You may carry on. You may carry on.
For instance, the settlements have been constantly expanding in recent years, and checkpoints in the West Bank remain intact. Also, the council contends building a wall on occupied land is irrational, unacceptable, and illegal. In this regard, the International Court of Justice has emphasized the wall is against international law, and Israel is obliged to stop the construction of the wall. Also, laying siege on Gaza Strip is the best example of human rights abuses by states. The living standards of Palestinians are abused and neglected in Gaza. However, international organizations not only ignore the sufferings of Palestinians there, but they refuse to criticize Israel due to its aggressive and inhuman behavior. An unlawful blockades maintained by Israel since 2007 has created an emergency in the Gaza Strip that poses serious threats to the entire population living there. In the first 2 decades of the 21st century, the UN and its affiliated organizations don't have the necessary tools to force Israel to stop violating Palestinian rights. In this regard, the Security Council, as an international institution that is responsible for providing and ensuring stability and security around the world, has been ineffective in protecting and defending Palestinian rights in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. For example, by waging war in recent years, Israel has indiscriminately targeted the homes, hospitals, schools, religious sites, and even UN facilities in the Gaza Strip. Consequently, thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, have been killed, and inaccurately, Israel claims it defends itself by carrying out attacks on humans, on Hamas position. However, according to Richard Falk, the former UN Special Reporter on Palestine, Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation. He correctly points out that apartheid, annexation, and mass displacements and collective punishments have become core policies of Israel. But unfortunately, the Security Council, as I said, is ineffective in protecting Palestinian rights in Gaza Strip. Actually, the Security Council has failed to accomplish its main duty, meaning peacekeeping. The right of veto and pressure of the US are considered major factors and obstacles which prevents the Security Council to play its expected role. Given the circumstances, we cannot expect the UN agencies can protect the Palestinian rights due to their lack of power. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Ehsan Ejazi, for your very insightful points regarding this topic. And now, without wasting any time, because we are getting closer to the iftar in India, and somehow we have to reach to our house or home. So I'm not taking much of your time. And now we are going to hear from Professor from Iran, Professor Mehdi Zakarian Amiri, Open Islamic University of Iran. Professor Zakarian, are you there? Professor Zakarian, are you there? Are you hearing us?
Yes, I hear you. Yeah. Do you hear me? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me for this conference. I think in international relations, one of the most important issues is the issue of the Palestine. And unfortunately, this issue is used by the states and government as an instrument for their national interest. They don't think to the right of the Palestinian people, but they think only to their own interests in international community. So if you go to India, if you go to UK, if you go to United States, to France, to Iran, to Egypt, to all countries, they talk about the Palestine, but in fact, nothing is forwarded for the rights of the Palestinian people. This is the main problem we have in international community. So the subject of this conference or this webinar is double standards, human rights, and double standards toward the Palestinian people. I think human rights is not double standard. Human rights is universal. And the standards of human rights is for everyone, every people around the world. The problem is that the double standard of states, for example, United States or UK, they believe that we should respect the sovereignty of the Ukraine, but they don't think to the rights of the Palestinian people. This is true. But look to Egypt, look to Saudi Arabia, look to Iran. These countries, they said and they declared that we are going to support the rights of the Palestinian people. This is true. But for example, Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Egypt or Iran or Turkey, they respect the rights of their citizens? This is the question. So the double standards you can see in any country. All of the countries, they violate the human rights standards. But the degree is different and the forms and the methods is different. This is the problem we have in international community. Me, I believe for defending the rights of the Palestinian people, we should focus on two parts or on two issues. One of them, United Nations. United Nations has an important role to protect the rights of the Palestinian people. Secondly, INGOs, international non-governmental organizations, but not GNGO, governmental, non-governmental organizations. INGOs also, they can do a lot of things for the rights of the people. So this is important to look to international organizations and to emphasize the rights of the Palestinian people by these instruments. If we want going to look to the act or to the practice of the states, we are not going to find many things for the Palestinian peoples. As I said, states, they look to their own interests. For example, Arab countries, they are very active to build an enemy for their own people, for the Arab nations. Why? If they do that, their people, the Arab peoples, they are not going to think about the despotism of the Arab countries in or region. So when they say that the peace with Israel is imposed by the United States, they try to make another enemies like Iran for themselves, for their nations. So this is the issue. We should be more careful about that. After this one, I should say, because some of your speakers, they talked about the United Nations and that there are a double standard in the United Nations also against or towards the Palestinian people. I should say, United Nations made a lot of things, but they are not enough. The one important This is the 29 November day, the day of the Palestinian, the day of the solidarity with the Palestinian people, which was very important. And in this day, the state of Palestine is accepted as a member for the General Assembly. So this is a very important to recognize Palestine as a state. And it's happened in the United Nations. And so if you are a member in the United Nations, then you can apply for International Court of Justice. What the Abbas state, they did. And after that, international ICC made a case against the Israeli states. And as if you remember, for this one, Trump regime, they did a lot of things against ICC. It was for many reasons, but one of the more important reason was that. So this is important to say that they are the positive act and positive practice by the United Nations. I believe there are some problems, but if we are going to make an evaluation, they are positive and they are negative. So we should try to enhance the positive part of the United Nations and to use this possibility for the Palestinian peoples. Thank you. Thank you for.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehdi Zakarian Amiri, Open Islamic University, Iran, for your takes on this important topic, as we are today having Quds Day. And now I'm going to request to Dr. Taslim Rahmani, the President, Muslim Political Council of India, to have his own opinion and take along with the conclusive marks, of course.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
First of all, I want to thank to the Iran Culture House, New Delhi, and Idara Nida Islam for inviting me for such a distinguished webinar on such an important and burning and long-standing issue of Palestine. And I feel myself fortunate enough to be amongst such important dignitaries of the international repute. Then I pay my humblest tribute to Hujjatul Islam, Hazrat Ayatollah Khomeini Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, who actually shift the focus once again towards the cause of Palestine by declaring the last Friday of Ramadanul Mubarak as the Yawmul Quds or the Quds Day. And really, we are seeing that the Quds Day has become a normal in Ramadan. It has normalized as a day for Palestinians to raise their voice and to remind the world that Palestinian issue still remains unresolved. This is highly unfortunate that for last around 100 years, and I say 100 years under inverted commas, and I include the background of creating an Israel and dismantling Palestine from the maps of the world. We have seen how the maps of Palestine has been changed and shifted like a Palestine, like an Israel, instead of Palestine. Now, it's a very important issue and topic today. You have decided that the double standards of human rights. It's not just the human rights, I feel. Human rights are the same, and wherever and whenever the human rights are required, the world stands for those human rights everywhere in the world. I have not seen the world is not standing for the human rights. Very recently, we are all quoting US, that Russia and Ukraine war. And I don't know whether really the Ukraine deserve to be the recipient of a human right or not. It's highly controversial. I'm not sure about it, that whether the Ukraine must receive the human rights activist attention or not. It's still under war. But there are so many occasions where the human rights activists and the United Nations, the Human Rights Commission, etc., has raised their voices and provided some help to the needy nations, to the needy communities, etc. But what my contention today is that it's not the double standards of human rights as such. It is actually the world as a whole is divided into two parts. And I'm saying a very bitter truth. Maybe some of my brothers not agree me. But what, as I see this world, the daily newspaper, the daily news reporting, the daily happening from across the globe, whatever our friends tell from across the world, whatever our brothers tell across the world, whatever is the narratives, binaries presented through the various media centers, I feel and I conclude by my own that world is divided into two parts. One is the Islamic world and another is a non-Islamic world. Now there is an ongoing war for last more than half a century. When the Zionism, fascism, capitalism, and the monarchies, they have joined hands. These forces are clubbed together against whom? Against Islam. So the world is fighting. There is a fight where now it's a very clear and crystallized war between Islam and non-Islam. So if the Palestinians are standing at the Islamist side, their human rights can never be as equal as to those who do not belong to the Islamic side. This is a very large and prominent difference, which is very highly visible and optical. I think nobody can deny it that there is a difference. When there are some Germans who has been shot down by some miscreant or some terrorist, it is a large UN trial and every human rights are there. But when there is a cartoonist who produces some caricatures, that cartoonist also enjoys the human rights instead of those billions of people whose sentiments has been hurt by the single cartoonist. So if this is the parameter of defending the human rights, then we can understand actually what are the parameters of adopting those human rights. So if the parameters are highly religious, and we are not admitting that these are the religious parameters, then whom we are complaining to? This is the big question. Are we the beggars? Can we afford to have a begging bowl in our hands and stand in front of the United Nations General Assembly and ask them, oh, you, the people of human rights, come on, do justice and give us our rights? Can we afford it? And did it work earlier? We know it's more than 80 resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly against Israel. More than 80. Those resolutions has declared Israel a war criminal. They have committed war crimes. But then what happened? After those 80 resolutions, is any nation of this world imposed any sanction against Israel? Ever? Never since 1945 to today, to 2022, despite of such largest number against any single country of resolution, largest number of resolution against Israel, still not a single penny has been refused from Israel, from any country of the world. Isn't it? Why? Why? Is it the support we are providing? We, as far as the votings are concerned, the world always vote in favor of Palestine, not in favor of Israel. But as far as the support is concerned, the world always supports Israel, not to the Palestinians. Why? Why? Because only, and I say with full conviction on my command, because the Palestinians are Muslims, because the Palestinians belong to Islam, because the world is fighting against Islam, because there is a growing Islamophobia, because the whole world doesn't want to see the Islam again at the forefront of the global governance of this world. They are afraid of Islam. They don't want Islam to flourish. And all the nations, and unfortunately, very unfortunately, within the Islamic our sphere, we also have two camps, two bigger camps. One camp has an allegiance to Israel itself, and other is a non-Israeli camp. And the Israeli camp, we know very clearly, very openly, the Gulf state, barring one or two, has joined hands with Israel. So their priority towards the Palestine is also shifting towards the Israel and not towards the Palestine. In India, with the change of regime, the foreign policy of our own country, my own country has been shifted towards Israel because we have so many MOUs with Israel on the agricultural front, on the strategic front, on the security front, on the military front. We have this growing strategic relationship with Israel, and we cannot build up those relationships with Palestine for the obvious reasons. So the policy is a total U-shift towards Israel, not Palestine. So this has become another grave situation. So under these circumstances, the world has to decide. Particularly, I call upon the Muslim world through this international conference to join hands, to come together. The camps who do have an allegiance with Islam, who declare themselves as Muslims and practicing Islamists, they have to come together. And again, I reappreciate the role of Imam Khomeini Rahmatullahi alayh, in a sense that he was the person in this century who proved that Islam is still a relevant force, relevant governing force in this world. Islam is not an obsolete force. It is still a force which can rule, which can govern, which can flourish, which can provide justice to the humanity. This has been proved by Allama Khomeini Rahmatullahi alayh in this century. This is his biggest contribution. And because of this contribution, because we have proved it for last 40 years, now the world, now the Muslim nations must come closer to each other and make a strategy to liberate Palestine, because liberation of Palestine is not the liberation of one piece of land, it is the liberation of the Muslim Ummah. Because in each, I'm just finishing my words. I see you are watching towards the watch, but I'm finishing my words. You see, in each and every thing, a mishap occurring in this world, the crux is for everything which is bad for the humanity. There is Israel in the heart of that problem. Even if this USSR, this Russia and Ukraine war, Israel is there. Zelensky has very clearly said that I am Israeli. I am a Jew. I have seen my father and forefather have seen the Holocaust. He has said it. So unfortunately, another Israel is becoming here in the Far East Asia, in this Asian region. So another Israel is coming up there. And that the European Union Commissioner has visited India just 3 days back and met with our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And she has very clearly said, don't think that the Russia and Ukraine war is confined to the Ukraine itself. It will impact the whole region and it will impact India itself. I take it like a threat. And I said it to my media in India that it's a threat by the European Union Commissioner. And it is really a threat. So if they say that it will impact the whole region, so that clearly means that another Israel is in the process of coming up here in India itself. And in that West Asian Israel, they are controlling every economic, educational, literary, fine arts, every activity they are controlling from various means. So they want to enlarge their scope. They want to control the world economy by some federal bank or some small units. They want to weaken the Muslim forces around them. That's why after the First World War, we have seen the balkanization of West Asia. The very small nations, Muslim nations, broke away and very small nations. And after this Second World War, Israel came into existence. And if there is a Third World War, if at all there is a Third World War, and this Ukraine and Russia war, it may culminate, I am afraid, I'm apprehensive, it may culminate into another balkanization of this Asian region. So if they are transforming the bigger nation into a small nation just for the purpose when they will start coming from Israel to reach Medina, there will be no resistance in their way. So this is their game plan. And for their game plan, the Europe, particularly Europe, and fascist forces, Buddhist forces, if you talk about religion, Jews. I'm very open to say Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, their largest of population, the four largest religion, and I don't know from where this Brahminical and non-Brahminical religion term has come at before, but these are the four major political forces of the world which are fighting against the Islam alone, and these forces have joined hands to liberate, to finish Palestine, to see a greater Israel, to see the demolition of Makkah, to see the demolition of Medina and Haram and Sharafat, and this way to see the dismantling of whole Islam from the world. This is what the game plan is. So you kindly do not expect any human rights from this world, which is controlled by a weakening United Nations, and that United Nations is controlled by the same America and same Israel. Do you think that they will uphold the justified human rights? Never. So create your own human rights, help the Palestine by your own forces, and keep it in your mind that this is a war between Islam and non-Islam, and Palestine is just a symbol of that war. Thank you very much for giving me time, and I apologize once again if I heard anybody's viewpoint. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taslim Rahmani Saab. Of course, we can say and we can add they are not only non-Islamic, but they are anti-Islamic lobby, which is very much active around the world, and they are promoting the Islamophobia. But of course, being a Muslim, we should not, give our hopes, and we have to be optimistic that, of course, the principles which we follow, it taught us that we have to be, always hopeful and optimistic about the help from God and help from our inner spiritual part and our values and principles and our ethics. And really, I personally shocked to see this, that there are certain people and bodies in the world who are raising the voices for animal rights. We have bodies and certain peoples around the world, in our country even, they are raising the voice for animal rights, but there are no, effective, I can say, impressive bodies and organizational structure around the world who can raise their voice for Palestinians. There are people who are, almost crying for Ukraine. Of course, killing the civilians are always condemnable, but they're not condemning the civilian killings in, Palestine and invasions and all that, illegal settlements. So this is something horrifying. This is something very much disappointing in this era. And of course, once again, the root causes, the differences, the hypocrisy, the difference of opinion, and too many voices, too many school of thought, official, unofficial, among the Muslim Ummah around the world, which weaken the, our causes and our stance regarding the Palestine and other issues throughout the world. If we could, unify, if we could unite it in terms of Islam, in terms of following the one religion, one holy book, and one prophet, we could have something, else and something different in the world. But unfortunately, we could not. Imam Khomeini, apart from declaring the last Friday of Ramadan as a Quds day, he has promoted the sense of unity, and he has a number of times he has given the call for unity among the Ummah, and he said that if Jews and Christians can be united against us, in spite of this, that their religion, their holy book, their prophet are different, why we cannot be united while our book, our holy book, our religion, our prophet are the same. So of course, if we could ensure the unity among us, we can do extraordinary things. We can do very big things, but unfortunately, we are witnessing that the situation is going from bad to worst. But we are hoping that God is there, and definitely God will help the oppressed, and with the help of Allah and the spirituality and our principles and our ethical background, we can do something extraordinary in the world. Once again, I would thank to all my panelists from Iran and India, and on the behalf of Idara Nadai Haq in Delhi, I would be thankful to my viewers also who are watching us on our YouTube channel, and I hope that we will see each other very soon with another topic, with another something constructive and something very positive, and some very academic level of summit. And really thankful to you, Dr. Rahmani, and Professor Ejazi, Professor Zakirian Amiri, Professor Ehsan Ejazi, and Professor Samudi, and of course, Wajidul Salam Muslimin, Akif Zaidi, and Professor Azuddin Hussain Hamedani. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing some very valuable inputs about this topic. Thank you very much.
Assalamu
alaikum. Thank you so much.